Our universe is built upon the number 2. In our cells, DNA is composed of 2 helical threads. Matter has its opposite, antimatter. Computers run on a code built on 2 digits, 1 and 0. Likewise, religions are built around good and evil, 2 forces that oppose each other in both action and purpose. God has his counterpart, Satan. Jesus has his opposite, the Antichrist. This pattern even shows up in polytheistic religions. Thor has his counterpart, Loki, and the Olympian gods in Greek mythology has their opposites, the Titans. However, one of our most popular mythological figures, Santa Claus, has lost the tail of his opposite. Called Krampus, this being dealt out punishments to the wicked children of the world. For the particularly nasty children, the Krampus administered the harshest of punishments, abduction and death. Over time, as mankind's command on its realm expanded, our technologies and our own actions took the places that were once held by mythological beings. Nowadays, parents indulge their children with gifts, replacing the old Santa Claus. However, there exist parents who snap and do unthinkable things to their children. Every year, our news media broadcasts stories of parents who went over the edge, almost like they were possessed by a demon. With no Santa Claus to reward the righteous, and no punishment for the wicked, both forces are unleashed indiscriminately against good and evil alike. For every naughty child rewarded, a counterbalance must exist. Yin must have a yang. Tomorrow, the day children had long waited for was coming. Christmas Day. In the silent and starry night, John woke up in the middle of his deep slumber. The cold air seized his skin and flesh, crawling down deeper into his bones. It became too cold for him to handle. He hopped out of his bed, grabbed his thick and furry jacket from the hook on the floor's wallpapered floors, and quickly lurched out of his room, going downstairs, where the unnerving creaking floorboard sound was coming from. It was the sound that had awakened him. The noise gave the kid goosebumps. He shivered as he silently listened to this sudden-disturbing sound, and felt an odd sensation of fear he couldn't explain. Step by step, he descended down the stairs, holding his breath. He was halfway across the stairs when he noticed a fat, round figure of a man in the living room, standing just in front of the Christmas tree. It held in its hand a large rectangular box wrapped in Christmas wrappers, tied with a shiny red ribbon that formed a bow tie shape. Thrown to the figure's back was a huge black sack, seemingly heavy and filled with things he had no idea what. At the figure's head was a red, upside-down cone hat with a fluffy cotton ball on its tip. On its face was a messy, silvery beard that flowed down from his chin. It was him. Before he was able to shout in joy, the figure spoke, a hint of sorrow evident in his raspy voice. He urged himself to stop. I thought children didn't believe in me, but you still did. You're a great fanatic of me, and I appreciate it as much as you appreciate my efforts. But that reason is not enough. I'm doing this to avoid the true rumors of my existence from spreading all over the world. I have done this countless times. I hope this is my last. You have already seen me. John, I'm sorry, but I need to eliminate you. A mystery must remain a mystery. You are not in my naughty list, but still, I must do what I must do. The figure faced him and stared sadly at his teary eyes. His happiness had already faded to terror before he knew about it. The figure set the box down to the feet of the Christmas tree. Slowly, the figure dropped the black bag to the floor and opened it wide, revealing the blood-soaked bodies of dead children inside. The menacing sight made him want to shriek for help, but he couldn't move his lips. Its maddening gaze still frozen at the boy. The figure pulled out a long, pointed dagger from his black bag. "I wish you a Merry Christmas, John. Forgive me." The figure spoke as he rushed to the petrified child, his dagger gleaming bright crimson in the darkness. I don't have much time left. I must recount my tale before my time is up, before I fade out of existence. The first thing I remember is waking up outside. It was snowing out and I was naked. I felt dozens of kids' hands about my head and body, rubbing my skin back and forth. I tried to run away, but my legs and feet were firmly planted under the snow, deep into the ground. I tried to flail my arms, but they too were frozen, immovable. I was trapped. I had no way of escape, and I could only hope that one of these children would soon set me free. The children stood back and glared at me with awe and wonderment. They whispered things to each other as they continued to gape at my raw, naked form. I wanted to shout at them, beg for them to release me, but none of them heard my plea. One small boy approached me and looked with a wide, evil grin upon his cherub-like face. He got down on the ground on his hands and knees as another boy quickly climbed on his back and met me face to face. His look was quizzical and contemplative, as if he wanted to do more to me, but could not decide what to do. I closed my eyes in hopes that I could concentrate on a happy place while he performed his dastardly deeds. He grabbed my nose and twisted it around and jammed it back into my skull, but careful enough not to break it. The pain surged through my body as he twisted and shoved for what seemed to be an eternity. The boy then plucked out each of my eyes and placed them back onto my face in different locations. Miraculously, I could still see, but my vision had been permanently skewed. He turned to his cohorts and reached for what I thought would be an undoing. But, surprisingly, he presented me with a wool scarf and delicately wrapped it around my neck. It wasn't much, but the warmth was lovely. It was enough for me to concentrate on while I remained out in the vile blizzard. He turned back to his fellow children and placed a tall, black hat on my head, as if to mock me. He jumped down and rejoined his comrades as they gazed at me once more. They jumped in jubilation as they finished their physical torture of my body, and just as quickly as it had ended, they simply left me. All of the children vanished into the blinding white of the snow. They have yet to return. Week after week, month after month, I stood there in my frozen solitude. The snow eventually cleared, and I saw the children passing by, not giving me any notice. I saw other people casually walking past me. I tried to call for help, but just like my captors, they could not hear me either. They could only see me. Soon, it began to grow warm. The scarf was no longer needed, but it was not removed. It only slid off of my neck, down my shoulders, and onto the ground. My nose, battered and bruised, slowly slid out of my skull and rolled down my chest, plopping onto the slushy mess that slowly began to rise around my feet and ankles. My eyes stayed firm, but now they are showing signs of fatigue. My spine has become deformed as I now slump over my right side. The chilling pool of ice and water continues to rise. It looks as if it may consume the rest of me, and I will slowly drown. It has been months since I first remembered my incarceration. My left eye has completely fallen out. A scarf swims around the pool that has reached up to my ears, and I will come to terms with my fate. I calmly wait for my end and can only pray that the hereafter is much more forgiving than my short, frozen life. Thumpity, thump, thump. I could never sleep well in hotels. I guess that's somewhat of an understatement. I could never sleep well in general, but hotels were the worst. Just the thought that the previous occupant of this bed is a complete stranger was repulsive in my mind, but that's beside the point. What I'm getting at is how this lack of sleep in hotels changed my life. Christmas. We were spending Christmas in a shitty hotel and not with family. Great. Don't get me wrong, it's not like I didn't enjoy the all-you-can-eat buffet of soggy hash browns and grits for Christmas Eve dinner. Of course, the first snow of the season had to cancel our flight down to Virginia. It was Christmas Eve and I was trying to sleep in this bleach-saturated room. My mind was wandering what happened in here to cause such an excessive amount of bleach needed. The room was nothing out of the ordinary. 2 beds, one for my dad and I and another for my sister and mom. A bathroom, and a stained microwave that looked like in need of a good dusting. Somehow I escaped the room and the stench of bleach into a dreamless sleep. Waking up, I could tell it was early morning. My dad was next to me snoring, and he usually wakes up before 4 a.m. That's when it hit me. It's Christmas, and I was about to let this bad fortune ruin my favorite holiday. Looking across the bed at the clock to check the time is when I noticed it. The silhouette of a man about 6'3" across the room staring at my mom sleep. Still half asleep and caught up in the moment, I couldn't help thinking of Santa Claus. I realized how stupid the thought was, and horror soon filled my head. I choked back a shriek. I knew I couldn't let him see me awake, so I quickly put my head back down, pretending to sleep. My mind was racing. Someone was in our room and I couldn't do anything. I was a scrawny 16-year-old. This man looked built like an ox. I wondered if I could wake my dad up in time, but I knew that wouldn't work. He slept like a rock. A bucket of water couldn't get him up fast enough. I was practically in tears. I never felt so helpless. For a second time, I choked back a scream. He was standing next to me, and I could feel and hear his repulsive breath on my face. It smelled like he'd been eating rotten meat for a week, now with no thought to brush his teeth. If he didn't know that I was awake, surely he did now, seeing my face was contorted in fear. The breathing stopped, and I couldn't help the sigh of relief. I would have kicked myself, but there was no need. I heard the room door open and close. I launched out of bed. Nothing in the room was in disarray, and my family was still asleep. It couldn't have been a dream. I couldn't have imagined it. Feeling awake as ever, a horrible idea popped into my head, and before I could push it away, I was pushing the door open. Glancing back to the door in order to memorize the room number, I saw the giant spray-painted black X on the door. Had I seen this without the prior experience, I probably would have thought it was just some stupid kids. I knew better, but not enough to know what it was for. My heart skipped a beat. There he was, turning the corner at the end of the hall. Why am I doing this? I tailed him down to the parking lot. He was nowhere in sight. One moment he was walking out the lobby, the next he was gone. Realizing how cold it was outside in paper-thin pajamas, I returned to the lobby. No one was around. Strange. I could swear there is usually a night concierge. Adrenaline wearing off, I realized how stupid and rash my actions had been. He could have killed me. I cursed myself back up the stairs. I knew something was wrong when I got to my floor. The door to my room was wide open. I hadn't left it that way, right? I walked inside, and after a quick search of the room, I determined it safe and my family was still asleep. I locked the door, got back in the bed, though I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I listened to my dad get up, and eventually my mom followed, but I still pretended to sleep. A few hours passed, and my parents got my sister and I up. We got into the car and made our way back to the airport. Digging through my bag to grab my iPod led to the finding of something that hadn't been in there the previous day. A note that simply held the 5 letters I still think about to this day. I knew you were awake. It's been 2 months since the hotel experience. It still scares me for my life, and it gets worse every day. The note I found wasn't the only one. I still received them. Patrick Finn arrived home from his Christmas conquest, beating out the snowstorm by mere miles, mere minutes. He felt not only the foreboding presence of the hazardous blizzard, but also that of something else, something darker. He felt as if it resonated not only within his soul, but also within the souls of those around him, within the very ground itself. Patrick had never bothered to check, but he was sure that beneath the grass and soil of Winter Harbor, Maine, therein hungered a gaping mouth or a chasm yearning for the flesh of the innocent, and anchored to the physical world only by a desire to seem normal. It had not yet been appeased because the residents of Winter Harbor were all but innocent. Patrick had moved to Winter Harbor hoping to escape the despondency and despair he had felt in his hometown, Belmont, Maine. So far, these feelings have only amplified, magnified, by both the wintry death that he had felt tiptoeing in the town's mist, and the lingering scent of paint that seems to permeate every building in the city. It was as if the town was constantly being repainted in some sort of half-hearted attempt to cover up something. Still, he felt it necessary to stay, so as not to make matters worse for his wife, whom he barely saw anymore, and his son, who always seemed so distant. He and his wife were going through a rough time in their marriage, and their son was feeling its effects. It was akin to what one might feel after a tumultuous earthquake. Patrick felt that he had to make it up to his son, so he went out and bought him the most expensive and extravagant thing he could get his hands on this late in the shopping season, a brand new video game system. He had assured his son that, even though he had acted out often this year, Santa would bring him something good. Throughout these charades, Patrick felt empty at the prospect of shopping for a boy that he knew nothing about, a boy whose existence was forgotten very often. On the eve of Christmas, Patrick arrived home before the snowstorm and quickly crept into the garage to wrap the present and place it under the tree. It was in this garage that he often felt abrupt changes, as if within its small space, it contained secrets beyond human comprehension. The musky smell of the old holiday decorations, copied with the omnipresent scents of fresh paint, varnish, and gasoline, all seemed to meld into one personified force, whispering sweet nothings to Patrick as he exited his car. This caused him to shudder heavily, as if beset by a fit of delirium tremens. He shrugged off the dull headache and dry mouth before quickly and sloppily wrapping the gift. Following this, he slipped it under the tree and began to creep upstairs. He couldn't help but grimace at the thought that he was as far from Santa as humanly possible. As he reached the top of the landing, Patrick glanced over at the clock. It read 11:49 p.m. He stood there, as if to wait for some fleeting childhood feeling that may accompany the arrival of Christmas. It did not come, as he soon found, nor the cheery music, nor the scent of evergreens and cookies. just deafening silence and that damnable scent of paint. It was everywhere, inescapable. The arrival of yet another disappointing Christmas struck Patrick like a blow to the face. He fell to his knees, then subsequently onto his stomach. He couldn't tell if he had passed out or not. Suddenly, a loud sound in his son's room jarred Patrick awake. He quickly got up and stumbled into the room. The popping sound he had heard made him wonder what made it, and when he finally found out, he was confused ever further. A large black humanoid, adorned with goat horns and a tongue that writhed like a snake, stood before him, clutching his son. Patrick stood dumbfounded, seemingly incapable of recognizing not only the creature, but anything else before him. "What do you want?" Patrick asked. Innately, he knew that the creature wanted something. The creature smiled, licking his lips. "Thine tender fruit, not spoiled by the worms of Myuu, but by the tree that bore it, ripened not into a brazier, but a rotten, hollow core." Patrick stared at the creature. Sweat began to collect on his brow. He felt as if his brain itself had been lit afire. He couldn't breathe. I can't say I understand," Patrick stammered out. The creature smiled again. "Not by love of a dying star can a planet be adorned. By the eruption of its most sacred peaks, I desire the treasures for what you hope to find salvation. The gift to your boy is a gift for me now." Patrick couldn't understand why the creature wanted the game system, but he felt it was necessary to give it up. He quickly bolted downstairs, grabbing the box and clutching it tight. He sprinted back up to his son's room. The creature, upon his arrival, thrusted Patrick's son to the floor and held out one long, beckoning hand. As Patrick handed over the present, he couldn't help but feel as if he was housed himself, exchanging an eternity for one single moment of gratification. The creature licked his lips once more and disappeared in the time it took Patrick to blink. When he was sure he was alone, Patrick fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around his son. He expected a thank you and "I love you," something. He heard nothing. He looked down. He found that his son was withering away, becoming the very shadows that inhabited the night around him. Patrick knew at that moment he was entirely alone, swallowed finally by the chasm beneath his feet. He stumbled to the garage before sitting down, embracing his solitude and his communion with the musky smell of paint that seems to beckon invitingly.